Ever wondered what happens when the most powerful kings of Europe march east to reclaim the Holy Land? That, my friends, is the story of the Third Crusade, a clash of titans that has echoed through history for over 800 years. Let's rewind the clock to the late 12th century. The year is 1187, and a chilling message arrives in Europe. Jerusalem, the heart of the Crusader states, has fallen. The man responsible was none other than Salah al-Din, known in the West as Saladin, a brilliant strategist and unifying leader. Saladin had consolidated Muslim power in Egypt and Syria, creating a formidable empire that surrounded the Crusader kingdoms. After a decisive victory at the Battle of Hattin, where the Christian army was annihilated, Saladin captured city after city, culminating in the surrender of Jerusalem itself. Unlike the brutal Crusader conquest nearly a century earlier, Saladin's takeover was remarkably restrained. He offered terms, allowed citizens to ransom themselves, and prevented a massacre. But for Christian Europe, the loss was a catastrophic blow, a divine punishment that demanded an immediate and massive response. The call to arms was answered by the three most powerful monarchs in Europe. First, there was the aging but legendary Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, a veteran of the Second Crusade. He commanded a colossal army, perhaps the largest of the entire crusade. Then, there was Philip II of France, a cunning and politically astute king, more interested in consolidating his own power back home than in distant glories. And finally, the man whose name would become inseparable from this crusade, Richard I of England, the Lionheart, a formidable warrior, a brilliant tactician, and a true romantic figure of the age. Richard was chomping at the bit for battle and glory. The crusade began with a series of dramatic, and often tragic events. Frederick Barbarossa's massive army marched overland, making impressive progress through Anatolia. But disaster struck. While crossing a river in modern-day Turkey, the elderly emperor drowned. His death was a devastating blow. Leaderless and demoralized, much of his immense army simply disintegrated and returned home, a huge loss for the Crusader cause before they even reached the Holy Land. Meanwhile, Richard and Philip chose the sea route. Their journey, however, was far from smooth. The two kings, rivals at heart, quarreled constantly. Their relationship was a soap opera of medieval politics. Richard, ever the opportunist, took a detour to conquer Cyprus, adding a valuable strategic base to his possessions. This delay only further strained his relationship with Philip. Finally, after a long, intense journey, they arrived at the besieged city of Acre in 1191. The siege of Acre had been a brutal 2-year stalemate. Christian forces had been trying to capture the port city from Saladin's garrison, while Saladin's main army surrounded the besiegers. It was a miserable war of attrition, filled with disease and skirmishes. The arrival of Richard and Philip, with their fresh troops and advanced siege engines, tipped the balance. Richard's leadership and engineering prowess were on full display. The walls were battered, the defenses weakened, and in July 1191, the city of Acre finally surrendered to the Crusaders. The victory at Acre was a major success, but it was immediately followed by more internal conflict. Feeling he had fulfilled his vow and eager to deal with political matters back in France, especially concerning Richard's territories, King Philip promptly packed his bags and sailed home. This left Richard the Lionheart as the undisputed, sole commander of the Crusader army. Many saw Philip's departure as a betrayal, but for Richard it was his chance to shine, to lead the charge on his own terms. With Acre secured, Richard knew his main objective was Jerusalem. But to get there, he had to march his army south along the coast. This was a perilous journey. Saladin's forces shadowed them relentlessly, launching harassing attacks and trying to lure the Crusaders into a trap. Richard, however, proved to be a master of logistics and discipline. He kept his army in a tight defensive formation, with the infantry on the outside protecting the cavalry and the fleet sailing alongside to provide supplies. He enforced strict discipline, preventing his knights from breaking ranks for rash charges. This tension finally exploded at the Battle of Arsef. Saladin saw an opportunity and launched a full-scale assault, hoping to break the Crusader column. For hours, Richard's army endured a storm of arrows and relentless charges. The Knights Hospitaller at the rear of the formation were taking heavy losses and finally broke discipline, launching a countercharge without orders. Seeing this, Richard knew he had to act. Seizing the moment, he led a devastating all-out charge of his own knights. The impact was shattering. Saladin's army was broken and forced to retreat. It was a clear tactical victory for Richard, proving that Saladin's forces were not invincible in open battle. After the victory at Arsef, Richard continued his advance, capturing the key port of Jaffa. He was now within striking distance of Jerusalem. Twice, his army marched inland towards the Holy City, and twice they turned back. Why? The decision was agonizing. Richard's military council advised him that even if they could capture Jerusalem, they couldn't possibly hold it. Their supply lines were overstretched. The city's fortifications had been dismantled by Saladin, and once the bulk of the Crusaders returned to Europe, any garrison left behind would be quickly overwhelmed. For Richard, a king who had never lost a siege, the thought of capturing Jerusalem only to lose it again was an unacceptable failure. Reluctantly, Richard abandoned the dream of reconquering Jerusalem. His army was weary, His resources were dwindling, and he was receiving troubling news about his brother John plotting against him back in England. It was time to negotiate. Richard and Saladin, two great rivals who had developed a strange, chivalrous respect for one another through their conflict, finally agreed to terms. The result was the Treaty of Jaffa in 1192. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control. However, the treaty guaranteed that unarmed Christian pilgrims would have free and safe access to the city and its holy sites. The Crusaders would also keep control of a narrow strip of land along the coast, from Tyre down to Jaffa for both sides. It was a compromise. Saladin kept the ultimate prize, while Richard secured the coast and, crucially, access to the holy places for his people. The Third Crusade was over. So, was it a success or a failure? It's complicated. The crusade failed in its primary objective to recapture Jerusalem, but it succeeded in reversing many of Saladin's gains. It recaptured key cities like Acre and Jaffa, secured the Crusader presence in the Levant for another century, and guaranteed pilgrimage rights. More than anything, the Third Crusade became the stuff of legend. It was the story of two of history's most iconic leaders, Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, clashing in a conflict defined as much by chivalry and mutual respect as it was by brutal warfare. It's a powerful chapter in history that continues to fascinate us to this day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the past, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which historical event you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious.